Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, live from Israel with Rabbi Chaim Coffman, the hoot. He's always making me laugh. I don't know about you guys, but he's always sharing the beautiful light of Torah, and that's why we tune in. So let's just break right in and see how the rabbi's doing today. Rabbi Coffman, how's everything in Israel? Always a joy to be with you. Now, you had some points you wanted to finish off from chapter 2, Mishna 7, before we jumped into Mishna 8, correct?
Right, that is true. It's always a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to be called a hoot. Been called a lot of things, but always good to be called a hoot, by one who knows what it means to be a hoot, right? So, yeah, we pretty much finished the seventh Mishnah, but there is one point that we sort of hit last week, the very end, that I think is a pretty crucial point, and that is that one of the great commentators, one of the later commentators, Maram Shik, mentioned that we saw before, as the Mishnah says, there's measure for measure,
right?
Because you drowned others. Hillel said he saw a skull floating in the water. He said, because you drowned others, they drowned you. Those drowned you will be drowned eventually. Right? There's measure for measure. Now, we don't always fathom. We don't always understand. We don't always understand the measure for measure. Right? Regardless of that, he says over here, we shouldn't try and delve into things that have to do with the Munah, that have to do with my belief in God. Why not? Because sometimes it's going to lead us to, other things.
That's right. Yeah.
To lead us to other things, other quote unquote philosophy maybe. And philosophers agree, right? The problem is with philosophers in general is that what do they agree upon? Now, they can have major disagreements, their view in the world, belief in God, different things. But what do they seem to agree on? The vast majority of philosophers out there, you got Socrates, Aristotle, others, what do they agree on? They agree on that they can only understand things with their mind. In other words, if something is outside of what they normally think, if it's something that we'll call supernatural, something that is supernatural, they're not going to believe it. They're not going to be interested in. Why? Because they're only going to believe what science tells them, what their mind tells them. But anything beyond that, what's the problem? They're going to say, we don't understand. No such thing hasn't been proven, right? Hasn't been proven over here. So if it hasn't been proven, then why in the world should I even give a lip service?
Because can I ask for a definition, Rabbi, of supernatural? Because as somebody who came out of Christianity, I hate to say this, but in reality, in a lot of their minds, they seem to think of it as never to be explained, and I find the profoundness of the sages teach so much that there is so much more beyond what we could currently thought we could ever understand that's out there that is understandable. But I find that the definition of supernatural for some people means it'll never be explained, and I find that to be an intellectual flaw. I think that Hashem will reveal a lot in the end that
the problem
makes sense.
The problem is people think that if I don't have an explanation, a rational explanation doesn't exist. Now you have to remember, before there was such a thing as microscopes, right? 13th century, 14th century,
right,
more,
yeah.
Right?
The cell, before they understood the cell, yeah.
Right. They claimed all kinds of things about the cell, and how the cell works. Now, what was that based on?
So on and so forth.
It was based on quote unquote logic, right? Based on science. But couldn't rational people have said, well, that's very good. Have you ever seen a cell? How do you know it to be true? You could ask the question by mathematics, right? Mathematics is a little different.
It adds
Why?
up or
Because
not.
if you want to take a parallelogram, you want to say these two angles are 90-degree angles. How do I know? Because there's a theorem, right? There's a theorem that proves it.
Methodology, yeah.
Right? There's a certain methodology, as Dan the man here says. There's a certain methodology. Now, if that's the case, science will say the same thing. I can explain about a cell. I can explain about other things. Doesn't matter if I've ever seen them in action. They'll take a certain leap of faith to a certain extent and say, well, we can prove it. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a leap of faith. They'll say we can prove it through science. But have you ever seen one? No. So how do you know it's true? Because they'll swear on anybody's life, their own or their mother's or whatever. They'll swear it's true because it's based on scientific logic. Now, scientific logic is not foolproof.
No, it's only a methodology, as you said, a theorem.
There are many, many holes in science.
Sure.
So you have to take certain things. They're telling you there are certain things you have to take for granted. There are certain things that's like the Aleph base. Like, this is true. We're going to tell you this is true. So based on that, this, that, and the other thing. Okay, but how do I know the first premise is true? Because they're going to have to base it on whatever they base it on and say, this is true because of this. And this is true because of that, right? Just like, you have an angle. You have a line, right? A and C. You got B in the middle. And if they're equal, so A to B and B to C is the same. How do I know? Equal measurement, right? But you can say, well, I know that to be true. How do I know? How do I know it to be true? Why do we say it's a leap?
So there are things beyond the measurable for sure.
There are
sane
things
people
that
would agree.
No question are measurable. But even if they're measurable, what are we using to measure? What are the dynamics that we're using to measure it?
Exactly.
Now, I have heard, been explained. I'm not an expert in science by any stretch.
Oh, you're a good mind, though, Rabbi.
But I heard someone explain, by the age of the universe, can only go far as back as carbon dating, as long as carbon has been in the atmosphere. So
what about atomic decay rates?
I don't know, whatever. I'm saying one explanation, but the explanation was how long has carbon been around? 5,700 so on here.
All the oil's from carbon.
Not billions of years, right? So a premise has to be, this is actually a good topic here. Because a premise has to be based on something, right? It cannot just be based on something that's a high in the sky idea. It has to be based on something, just like when I wrote history papers and I slung it like the best of them, right? So what did I do? You start with a premise, right? You start with a theory, a premise, and then you say a hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, right? A thesis, even better. How many adjectives can we think of here, right? Then you get to the middle, all the middle paragraphs. What do the middle paragraphs do? They prove your thesis. Now, what are you using as proof? Do I have sociological proof? Do I have first count? First count.
Yeah, but rhetoric is rhetoric still.
But you're right, but it has to have, fine. If you're building it up, and let's say 40% is rhetoric, the rest is proof, doesn't matter what the rhetoric is. I got 60% clear-cut proof, right? But if it's all about philosophical mumbo-jumbo, who's really going to care?
Yeah, it's
right?
Opinion.
That's your opinion. How many people say, oh, that's your opinion? Oh, that's what the rabbis say. That's what, you want to say that's what the Talmud says. Okay, so what's it based on? What's it based on? It's based on a premise that there is a God. He created the world. He gave the Torah to the Jewish people. So now, if it's based on that premise, what's someone going to ask? Someone's going to ask the $1 million question, how do I know? How do I know that to be true? So if you go back to all my Tanakh Talk videos I did on proof of God's existence, we showed in many different ways why there is a God, he does exist. Now, you have to go from there to say, okay, if he exists, how do I know he gave the Torah? How do I know he gave to the Torah to the Jewish people? How do I know it's not a big game of telephone? right? How do I know that, they messed it up? Or it's the exact same thing? How do I, then there's another question. For this generation, that question, I don't want to digress because I've spoken about this a lot. The question always is, so who cares if it's true? Who cares? Show me the relevance. Okay, I could do that. But they don't even get that far. They're not interested. They're not interested whether you can prove it or not. Now, let's take someone who's a real scientist, someone who's really going to evaluate evidence. Maybe there are 5 people like that in the world today, because most people are not intellectually honest. There's no question about it. In the last 30 years, I've met one person. One person who said, this was a Jew talking, who was intermarried, if I look into Judaism and I find out it's true, I have to change my life, I'm not willing to do it. So therefore, I won't look into it. So that person was intellectually honest. I've had other idiots come and say, oh, that's your opinion. Oh, that's this. We can agree to disagree. We can agree to disagree. You're not giving me any information. You're not showing me where I'm wrong. So what I said sticks. All right, the onus is on you. You prove me wrong. You show me where it's not true. So if you show me where it's not true, okay, I'll stop my broadcast. I'll stop everything. I'll go back into the secular world, right? But I'm waiting for someone to do that. No evidence. You don't have evidence. Oh, you want to know what evidence I have? I got plenty of evidence. How many people want to hear it? Not too many people. They're not interested. But the point is over here is you asked the $1 million question, and that is, okay, what's the terminology, right? What in the world are we talking about? Something that's supernatural. I heard a rabbi once say, what's the difference between miracle and nature? Miracle and nature, he said, the difference is frequency. We view nature as nature, right? You take an apple seed. We use an apple seed as an example. You plant it, plenty of sunlight. It's going to grow properly. It's going to have a tree. Yeah. It's going to have hundreds of apples, right? Oranges, whatever. So you're going to ask, why does that happen? Why does that work? So you're going to say, well, that's nature. You're right. It's nature that an apple seed was created with that DNA. Oh, that's so interesting. Why does every apple seed have that DNA? And what's the answer? Because. I love answers like that. Because it does. Okay, very good. So now I'll ask you another question. Rabbis are good at this, right? Where did that come from? Where did nature come from? Why is it that the world is not a little bit closer to the sun where we'd be incinerated, or a little bit further back and we'd be like Pluto, that frozen tundra? Or even though Pluto's got demoted as a planet, we'll be like Yukon territory. Ain't nobody living Yukon territory, right? Frozen tundra in general.
Yeah,
right now, why is that? Wolves. Why is that? So you say it goes on its axis, but it doesn't get any closer. It doesn't get any closer, it doesn't get any further away. King David himself says it's like the earth is standing still. But you're going to say, what, he didn't know about science? He didn't know it goes on its axis? Yeah. Even if he understood it goes on its axis, but he said it doesn't move. Essentially, it doesn't move. You're going to tell me it goes around the sun, right? That is true, right? But essentially, why doesn't it get closer? Why doesn't it get further away? You're going to say it's gravitational force. There are a lot of things we could explain according to science, but why? Why all of a sudden it's not like that? Why doesn't it go a little bit further? Because that's the way it was set up. Now, I could just ask a question based on that. A very, very simple thing. Don't you think the fact that the earth is going the way it is, and from the beginning of time, it's never gone closer to the sun, it's never gone further back, it's never gone out of its orbit, right, in general?
It's slightly moving. Sure it is. They can measure it. They can measure the motion, the movement.
I'm saying, why is it?
It's still in a habitable zone.
Even if it moves around the sun, right? The question is, why doesn't it get closer? Why doesn't it get further back?
Momentum.
A little further back. So, either we be incinerated or be frozen. So again, you can give me scientific explanation. There's scientific explanation, plenty of it out there that's going to explain it. Okay, even with that scientific explanation, why is that constant? Why has that been the same, or even if it's changed over time, but why hasn't it been that the Earth's been incinerated or the Earth's been frozen? Because again, it gets back to the same question. The reason is because, gravitational pull and all these different things. Fine, right? But where did it start? How did it start? So you say, well, there was a Big Bang. Okay. Does the Big Bang theory explain everything? Not necessarily, but we could, we could sit there and go through it, which we're not going to. Probably to your chagrin, we're not going to go through it. But the point is you have to say, okay, now I take a step back. I understand there's nature. I understand there's gravitational pull. I understand, there was a Big Bang or whatever happened. Whatever the case is, you have to now go take one further step back. And the further step back is, where did that start from? Did it just start from a bunch of amino acids and something happened? What made it happen? Let's go back to Stephen Hawking, right? Stephen Hawking proved mathematically and scientifically, proved beyond the shadow of a doubt, the world's an expanding universe. If the world's an expanding universe, don't you think something or someone or whatever is actually making it expand? Oh no, it happened by itself. We don't have scientific proof, but guess what? We'll get an answer somewhere. We're still going to hope by evolution, because we can't say that the creationists are right. But if there's an expanding universe, doesn't that make sense? Someone's causing it to expand? I could say that. Logically, right? But again, they'll say, for most people today, this is an irrelevant argument. The reason is because they don't care. They don't care if you can prove it. You can prove God's existence. They're not interested in change. It's not about truth. It's not about finding truth. It has nothing to do with any of that. All it is I want to do what I want to do. You leave me alone. That's all it is. Right? That's all it is, for most people today. Now, there are searching people. Someone, some of them will get to the truth, because the Talmud says clear. God, if someone goes in the right path, God will help them. If they go in the wrong path, God is not going to stop them, right? So there's tremendous leeway over here. Very good. But most people are never going to get there. Why not? Because they're never asking the question. They're not interested in the question, right?
Well, I understand quantity and quality, the difference. I mean, quantity is always measurable. Quality, is more subjective in measurement. And,
Yeah, but something like this, when you don't have an answer, right? You don't have a plausible answer. You have to be at least as open-minded to say that this is a plausible answer.
Yeah, right? I like probabilities.
Creation could be a plausible answer. They'll say no.
It's a highly probable.
They'll say no. That's for the Bible thumpers. That's for closed-minded people. That's for this. That's for that. Okay. But so give me an answer. Give me a scientific answer. You don't have one. So at least you have to say this could be a possibility. You're not proving it wrong, right? You're not proving it wrong, but they don't want to have anything to do with it, right? So most people today not interested.
I think the turnoff is when people imagine Hashem like a genie that goes poof, and they don't realize the restriction of that imposition or that anthropomorphism.
But they don't want to, because if there's restriction, why would I take it on? I had a secular Jew tell me this a few weeks back. They tell me, when it comes to Sukkot, for instance, it's 3-4 days after Yom Kippur. So Sukkot this year came out on a Wednesday night to Thursday night. So you got Friday, Shabbos, which can't really do anything. Sunday, Monday night is Sukkot. So by Monday night, you already have to build your sukkah. You already have to get your 4 species, right? Your lulav, your esrog, your willows, and your myrtle leaves. And you have to prepare food, right? If you live outside of Israel, that's 4 meals you have to prepare, right? So let's say outside of Israel, you got Sukkot is Monday night to Tuesday night to Wednesday night. You got a an in-between day, Thursday, then you got Friday or Shabbos. And then the next Monday night, you got Sunday, and then next Monday night, right? That next Monday night is what? Is Hoshana Rabbah. Tuesday night is Simchas Torah. A lot of meals to eat. A lot of food to prepare, a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do. So someone says, and this is a Jew talking, why would a Jew ever take this on? And, okay, you want to sit in the sukkah, you eat a little bit in the sukkah, very good. But you have to do everything in the sukkah. You have to sleep in the sukkah. You have to have 2 festive meals every, for the festive days, or 2 meals outside of Israel, whatever it is. inside Israel, whatever it is. But it's complicated. There's a lot of pressure, not to mention expense, right? There's a lot of things going on. So the person said, why would anyone take this on? Why would a Jew take this on? Forget a non-Jew. Why would a Jew take this on? Now, what would my obvious answer be? Because we believe it's true. We believe that's my obligation, right? But I didn't have enough time to even get into that, right? But that would have been the answer, and they just would have blown it off. It's like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to do what I do anyway. But for most people, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, right? It doesn't matter. Dr. Schroeder once told me he had an internet group at the very beginning when the internet started. He had an intergroup for physicists. So I asked him, did anyone ever ask you the question about 6 days in creation in physics? And he said no. Now here you got like the brains of physicists.
Yeah, I love Dr.
Right,
Schroeder.
Of this generation. Right, of this generation. So they have a chat group, different things in physics, whatever it is. So you tell me, okay, what about the book of Genesis? What about creation? He said, what are you kidding? They weren't interested in that. They had no interest in that. Whatsoever. So the point is that if it's not on your mind sight, so to speak, why would I look into it? Because I'm never ever going to look into something that's going to make me change my life. Not uproot my family potentially or whatever. I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? Right? That's what most people would say. But they're not that intellectually honest. Right? So most people are not going to say that. What are they going to say? I'm going to do what I do. You can say what you want.
You
can
do
prove
you
what
and
you
I'll
want.
do me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm never going to listen to what you have to say anyway. Okay? Right? So you're not intellectually honest. Fine. But you have to at least ask the question. If you say, well, I think there was a Big Bang. Okay, that's great. Who started the Big Bang? Where did it come from? Then once you start getting into a certain topic, someone will say, yeah, I'm a good person. I help others. I do good things. I said, that's great. I said, let me ask you the following question. What's your definition of good? Do you cheat on your taxes? Some people think it's a mitzvah to cheat on their taxes because they're paying too much to Uncle Sam anyway, right? Some people say, well, euthanasia is okay, right? I'm taking this person out of their misery or out of my own misery. That's, we hold that's murder. So what's your definition of good? So when I started going down this path, person stopped the conversation,
nobody wants
at a dead stop.
Nobody wants to shame.
I don't know how we got into this conversation. This conversation's not going any further. That I didn't say that. That's what someone else said to me. Now, why? Because they know where the conversation's going, right? Because it's going to be very hard for someone to prove morally how something is going to be permissible today for all generations, right? How something is absolutely moral, etc. It's not just moral relativism, and all that. But again, without digressing here, because I've spoken about this a lot, most people are never, ever going to get into that conversation. They'll poo-poo you, they'll make fun of you, they'll say all kinds of things, but you won't get to the heart of the matter because they're not willing to evaluate evidence. So now, back to the original question. The original question is, what is supernatural? Supernatural is something that even if it can be explained according to natural things, i.e. nature, right? We mentioned about an apple seed. I could mention very simply, which I mention a lot because Avos Studies of the Heart speaks about it a lot, and that is the human body. The miracle of the human body. Right? If you have the miracle of the human body, and he goes into detail, certain things inside the body don't say, well, I'm going on strike. Kidneys say, you know what, I'm not excreting this, I'm going on strike. Doesn't happen. They don't have the power to do that. But the reality is that these things are miracles. Person eats, person drinks, right? And and inside, the toxic stuff gets stored somewhere, and then eventually it's gonna come out. Doesn't come out straight away, it doesn't just go through you, right? That wouldn't make any sense because then you wouldn't be able to retain it, right? You'd still be hungry afterwards, etc. Or thirsty, whatever the case is. But there are different, organs that have different functions. right? And now, if you look at the functions of what the organs do, it's pretty darn miraculous. Not only that, what is a person going to say? A person's going to say, you know what? That's how the body works. So let's go back before a person's born. We're going to keep this PG-13 because I don't want you to get thrown off YouTube over here, right? And that is that, when a woman conceives, right? You need the sperm of the man, you need the egg. We're going to keep this clean, right? And then all things being equal, there's a child that's formed. Now, when the child is born, and the child is born in a normal way, and you check, which I always did with all my kids, I check 5 fingers, each hand, 5 toes, whatever, a nose, 2 eyes, 2 ears. It's a pretty miraculous thing, right? If you understand, the Mishna in Pirkei Avos says later, which we'll probably get to in the next millennium, there are 3 things you have to know, right? Where you come from, where you're going, and who you have to stand in front of in order to give testimony after you die, right?
Yes, that's
right? You gotta,
humble,
where you come from, what they call what the
putrid drop.
Talmud says a putrid drop, right? A tipa srucha. You're gonna go into the land, you're gonna die, worms are gonna eat your body, and then you're gonna have to give an explanation for what you did in this world to God. So let's go back at the beginning. It says you come from a putrid drop. Now, even if you tell me it's got all the DNA and all these things together, the fact that it hits the egg and it forms a child, and the lungs develop, the heart's beating, like all these different things that go on,
nervous system, it's
and how the baby is formed after 9 months, and all that. Someone's going to say that's biology. What does that have to do with God? That's biology. You're right. That's biology 101, 101A. I agree. But the point is that even if it's biology, it does not take away from the fact that the way that happens is absolutely miraculous. It's miraculous, right? I don't think there's any question. You tell me I don't think it's any less miraculous than taking an apple seed, which has the DNA and everything in it, and it forms apple trees. Why should it do that all the time? All things being equal, good weather, enough rain, enough sunlight, it's going to produce a tree with hundreds of apples. Why should it do that? Because that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's not supernatural. Oh, it's not supernatural. You know why it's not supernatural? We don't see it. We can't fathom it. Why? Because God's ways are hidden. So God hid himself in such a way that a lot of things that we see today that are absolute miracles, no question, they're absolute miracles. God hides it and hides it and hides it within nature. Now you're going to say, but if God would, some people may say, if God would show me an open miracle today, then I become religious. Right? And what's the answer to that? That's a crock. That's totally not true.
Yeah, they'd totally find not true.
And one of the things I ended with last week, which I'll mention, is the fact that the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Elijah Vilna, more than 250 years ago, told one of his students, he's talking about Aristotle and Socrates and all them, how they would only understand things according to the mind, right? If they didn't see it with their mind, they didn't understand it with their mind, then it doesn't exist. So the Vilna Gaon says, I could say an ineffable name of God right now. I could bring the constellations, the stars into this room. And if they were sitting here right now, they'd be trying to figure out how I did it, right? They'd be sitting there, mirrors, this, it's magic, it's whatever. They'd be trying to figure it out. Now, so one of the students said, the Vilna Gaon on that said, how do I know? How do I know that's true? He says, I know it's true because in the time of Aristotle, there was a Jew. There was a Jew called Shmuel HaKatan. Samuel, the small one, right? Helped establish some of the prayers that we say in the Shemona Esrei, etc. And if he would have seen such a person, he wouldn't have had this question. Because here you have somebody, in such a spiritual level, that you see somebody like that, you cannot say that's by accident. You can't just say, well, this is what happened and whatever. Can't say that. Right? So in other words, supernatural, is something that it's going to be very hard to measure. Why is it hard to measure? It's hard to measure because we're talking perspectives. When you have different perspectives, then some person says this is an absolute miracle. And someone else says, that's chance, could happen. Right? One example, it's actually a cousin of my wife's, we had a discussion. It was a number of years after the Gulf War, and by the Gulf War, 1991, there were 39 Scud missiles. 39 Scud missiles Saddam Hussein sent to Israel, and they all hit open areas. 39. Now, shortly before that, there was a suicide bomber in Lebanon, or Beirut, right? That killed 270 American servicemen. One suicide bomber, right, with a car full of explosives, etc. So I asked this person, I said, okay, what are the odds? 39 Scud missiles. And these missiles are supposed to be totally accurate, extremely accurate. What are the odds? 39 Scud missiles that are shots with, relatively close by. They don't hit anything. They only hit open areas. They don't hit any buildings. Not a house, not a bus stop, not a big building, nothing. They hit open areas. Now, there are one or two possibilities. Either you got the stupidest Arab shooting the missile. That's one possibility, right? Total moron, doesn't know how to shoot. Okay, but, that could be one possibility. What's the other possibility? The other possibility is there's something else going on here, right? There's totally something else going on. So this person takes off his watch. I don't know if they still make watches like this, his Casio watches, takes off his watch, and he starts pushing buttons right on a calculator. So I said, come on, what are the odds are like 1 in a billion? 1 in 150 million. The odds of that happening at relatively close range, if these things are supposed to be so accurate, is about 0. Right? The first one hits, an open area, okay. Second one hits an open area, fine. Third, fine. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 10th, 15th, 20th. The odds are about 0. Right? They should be able to hit something somewhere. At least aim in a different direction, or whatever the case is. But, I said the odds of something like that happening are very, very small. Very, very small. Now, if you knew this to be true, 39 Scud missiles, and you would say, what are the odds? I'll bet any amount of money. What are the odds? None of them are going to hit a building or something. What are the odds that all of them are going to land in open areas and they're not going to do damage to houses or whatever? The odds are 0. Now, if I would have put money down on that, I would have made a lot of money, ton of money, right? I keep saying, okay, double it. The odds are 0. The odds are 0. This is going to happen. Now, what does this person want to tell me? This person wants to tell me it doesn't matter how small the odds are, they could happen. So my example would be like this. If you're playing roulette, right? You're playing roulette, and let's say it's fixed. That black 13 comes up 70% of the time. Right? Let's say that to be true. If you know that to be true, you're going to be a very wealthy person. Because 7 times out of 10, you're going to win. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, if I know 7 times out of 10 I'm going to win, right? And I got a crooked deck over here, I'm going to make a mint. I'm going to, majority time I'm going to win, and I'm going to make a ton of money. Right? So in this case, but in this case, it's a 0% chance. It's a sucker bet. It's a 0% chance this is going to happen. The person said it could still happen. Right? Now, why would they say that? They would say that very simply because if you say that, well, what's causing this to happen? Bad weather? Nope, clears, the weather was clear. All those days, no big winds, no rain, no nothing. Right? Oh, that's not, I can't use that as an excuse. You come up with 1,000 excuses, but knock them all these excuses off. But what's the one excuse they're not going to make is the fact that who's the one behind it? The good Lord above. He's the one behind it. That's going to be the last thing they're going to say. Why? Because if they say it's a miracle, if they say it's really God, then there are repercussions. There are repercussions, for potentially for what I do. So if there are repercussions, I'm not going to say that. because I don't want to change my life, right? So now the problem's going to be you could both see the same thing. They see it as something that is not supernatural. And you say, well, how else do you explain it? It doesn't make sense rationally. Now, if you come up with, say, some scientific explanation, maybe there's a scientific explanation. Now, if there's a scientific explanation, and let's say it's a valid explanation. Now, what is God saying over here? God's saying, okay, you can explain it, according to science. At the same time, you're taking God out of the picture.
Yeah,
right now, if you take the supernatural out of the picture, you're explaining it scientifically. Scientifically, you can say, well, it's part of nature. Right? Without getting into where nature comes from and all that. But you say, this is a natural thing, this can be explained. Now, what does that do? That also gives the person the ability to make a mistake. In other words, we could say, well, it's an absolute miracle, believe in God, very good. Person can also say, well, I can explain it according to science. If I explain it according to science, who says God's doing that? It's science, right? It's natural. So if it's natural, it takes God out of the picture. What does that do? It makes him into a heretic. But God's ways are totally hidden. If God's ways are totally hidden, can't God, and what does God do? He masquerades things in this world in a natural way. It's a hidden within hiddenness.
Are they always going to be hidden?
Yes. Until the end of days. Until when the Messiah comes, then you're going to have open miracles like they had in Egypt. But up until then, everything's going to be hiddenness within hiddenness. So even if we could explain it, maybe it was a miracle, it's so shaded in nature that other people will say, well, that makes perfect sense. Right? That makes perfect sense because it's a natural thing. So now, Dan, the man here, wants to say, so how do you know what's supernatural, what's not? How are you going to be able to prove it? You're only going to be able to prove it if they're able to see according to your world. If they can look into your world and they can see it through your eyes, they can be totally 100%, which never happens, but they can be, 100% intellectually honest, see it from another perspective, that's different. But most people, I'll say everybody, no one's going to do that. They're going to hold what they hold. It doesn't matter what you hold, right? So in other words, you both see the same thing. One says it's a miracle. The other person says no. It can be explained according to science, according to nature. So who says I have to believe in supernatural? So you're coming from two totally different perspectives. So people like that, probably a waste of time to argue with, because they're never going to see it from your perspective. They're not interested. You could prove God's, existence. And people say, well, that doesn't prove anything. This doesn't prove anything. That, people can use that as an excuse all the time. Doesn't matter. Like I had a college student once told me many years ago. He says, even if you can prove 99% of the Torah is true, I still have 1% free will. Right now, what is that person saying? I don't have to look at evidence. I don't have to look at overwhelming evidence to tell me it's true. I don't have to do that. Why would I have to do that? I got my 1% free will. Now again, if you knew 99% of the time when you roll the dice, it's going to be a 6, you're going to win. You're going to win, tons of money over here. So if you tell me it's less than half, you tell me it's only 20%, 30%, okay. Right? But if you tell me it's such a high percentage that we can prove, that we can show, that we can show like the palm of our hand, we can show it clear as day. You can't just negate evidence. Scientists negate evidence.
Yeah, sadly.
They poo-poo evidence, and most
they don't even play by their own rules. Yeah.
Yeah, most secular Jews today, they poo-poo evidence. They won't. Not only they poo-poo evidence, they won't even look into it. Yeah. They'll just say you're a fanatic. You're right. I'm a fanatic. I'm a lot of things, right? But that doesn't answer my question. Answer my question. What, does the Torah say this or it doesn't say this? Is it true or it's not true? No, I don't have to prove that. I don't have to answer that. Why not? That's the bottom line. Did God speak at Mount Sinai or not? Right? No. Now, people are not coming back and say you can't prove that. I've come in contact with a lot of people, over the years, right? A lot of them my own family. No one's claiming that. No one's clean. Do you really think this? I have one cousin that, has more of an open mind than most people, but he studied a little bit. So, I'll cut him some slack because he actually, does ask some good questions. But everybody else, they're not interested. Well, I grew up this way. This is the way I was taught. Well, who says the way you were taught was right? And who says this is right? But they don't care. They just want to do what they want to do. But someone told me they had a thriving, quote unquote, conservative synagogue. And in 20 years they've lost 40% of the membership. I think more, actually. 1 second. No, sorry, they've lost 60% of their membership.
And they called it
how
thriving.
many people intermarried and all that. Now, what was the excuse? One excuse was membership dues are too high. That's why people don't come. I said people don't come because they don't believe it, because the parents don't believe it, so they don't have a connection to it, right? There was someone, was getting married. They didn't want a rabbi. They were marrying another Jew. They didn't want a rabbi there, and even if the rabbi was there, he should have mentioned God. The person doesn't know anything about anything. Nope, can't mention God. Why not? What did God do against your life over here? I mean, maybe he did something terrible. Who knows? But can't mention God. Can't mention this. So of course they're not going to pass it down to the next generation. Not about dues. What does that have to do with dues? That we can say maybe it's a partial thing. People can't afford to belong. And if they could afford, and if you made it free, you think the masses are going to be joining? Except they were coming to see me. Then the masses would be coming because I'm like a magnet, right? Total magnet over here. That'd be different. But you don't have that. You don't have that. So you're talking in different planets over here. No pun intended, right? Someone's gonna say what you see is supernatural. I see is every day. I see is the norm. I see is, I can explain it through science. So you can't even have that type of discussion because you're really in two different, you're in two different worlds, right? But the problem is, you got these philosophers, right? This is what we were speaking about before. You got Aristotle. You got Socrates, get all these great philosophers, but they didn't see anything outside what their mind tells them. Now, they'll believe other things, even though it has been proven, but maybe, as we said before, scientifically, it's been, we got clear scientific proof and theorems and all that. I don't need to see it with my own eyes. Oh, now I see it with my own eyes. Now I can see it under a microscope. Now it just backs up what we said. Okay, but there's a certain level of leap of faith, but they'll never say it's a leap of faith. Why? Because it's based on theorems. Very good, but why is it, they're going to say also, even if they're a genius, and they have 120, 130 IQ, doesn't matter. Even if they're a total genius, does that mean they know everything about everything? Doesn't mean that. And because there are things that they don't fathom, that are beyond themselves, right? Where do they get the gall and say, nope, doesn't exist? If I can't fathom it, it doesn't exist. Well, you're sort of shortchanging yourself, because basically you're saying, I know and I understand how the world works. I know every intricacy in the world. I mean, that's a little bit, I would say, gaivadik. That's like being conceited. It's like Aristotle saying, I know everything about everything in the world. I know about science. I know about philosophy. I know about math. I know English grammar. I know all these things like the back of my hand. There's nothing you can't tell me about any of these things. Okay. Now, what about something you don't necessarily know about? Something that, let's say you have not even a first grade education on. So you're going to say, that which I don't know about, okay, I'll look into it. But if it's something that's beyond me, something I can't see, something I can't fathom, it doesn't exist. Right? Now, people will say to us, and they'll say to Orthodox Jews, or they'll say to Bible thumpers in general, Jews or non-Jews, they'll say, you live by a leap of faith. The only people that live by a leap of faith are Christians. I hate to tell you. They're the ones that live by a leap of faith, because nothing in that book makes any sense at all. Zero. There are contradictions up the gazoo. And as I always mention, any book that has any problems that are false, that you prove is false, I don't even have to entertain them as a possibility for anything. I don't care if they believe in one God or not. I don't have to entertain that possibility. You know why? Because it's proven to be false. If it's proven to be false, and all these religions are false, why would I entertain something that is false? Now, if you don't understand, So now you got these big egos. You got these big egos, these philosophers, right? They got these big egos say, well, if I can't fathom it, doesn't exist. And they're going to say, you live by a leap of faith. Well, if I can prove 60, 70% that the Torah is true, whether physically or philosophically, and I got concrete proofs, the other 30%, they could say, well, you don't have proof for the other 30%. Right? That's like grasping at straws. Because if I have 70% proof, isn't that a heck of a lot of evidence to prove what you want to prove? That's good evidence. If you say I have 10% of the evidence, okay. It's a little more of a stretch to try and prove your point. But if I have a high percentage of evidence, you can't say, well, you don't have the other 30%. You can't say, well, 99%
probabilities come into play at that
point. The other 1% doesn't matter. What do you mean it doesn't matter? I have enough evidence. So then I would flip the script and I would say, okay, let's look at the evidence. Let's see if there's evidence. If there's no evidence, I'll become like you. I'll even watch the CFL. Right? But they're not even going to entertain the possibility. It's never going to happen. Why? Now, you could get yourself into trouble if you don't know what you're doing, because they'll say, well, that's not a good enough proof. That's not, they could knock out all your evidence also. They say, well, that doesn't prove anything. Oh, that doesn't prove anything. Okay, so now answer me why. Why it doesn't. But the point over here is that by philosophers, if they only agree things they understand with their minds, then it's easier for them to contradict the truth of the matter. And what essentially are they going to do? They're going to make up all kinds of philosophies, all kinds of different things, in order to do whatever their desire tells them. And that's it. So people will say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what you say, get off your high horse, get off your soapbox, doesn't matter what you have to say, I'm not changing. I don't have to listen to you. What did I say that was so offensive? I asked you a question. I didn't hammer you yet. I just want an answer to my question. Did God speak at Mount Sinai? And if he did, what did he mean? Did he pass it down to Moshe? I don't have to answer your question. So, okay, I have to go into your world, but I believe your world is false. I believe your world doesn't work. I'll give you 10 reasons. No, I don't have to listen. Why not? Because people want to do whatever their desires tell them. So if it hasn't been proven, and it's something that is, let's say, above a person's normal intellectual capability, it's something they have to see outside of themselves. If that's the case, what are they going to say? I'm not going to do that. Why? I'm only going according to what I know. And if you want to believe that, that's a leap of faith. Right? Now, Judaism believes that it's not just a leap of faith, right? It's certainly belief with knowledge. And we have evidence and all kinds of different things. But you don't even want to look at the evidence. That is what the point here is. They're going to say, I don't have to look at this. This isn't real. This isn't this. It's a leap of faith. And they're going to want to do whatever they want to do. But that does not discredit the information. In other words, if you write a term paper, you write a thesis, and you prove it. And at the end, you conclude. So if your thesis is not conclusive, okay, so then you didn't prove it enough. But if your thesis is pretty conclusive, and you got a ton of evidence, you can't just say, I don't have to read this. I don't have to look at this evidence. I don't believe it. I don't believe what you wrote. I just gave you evidence. I gave you all kinds of evidence over here. What do you mean you don't have to look at it? That's the problem. And if Aristotle, Socrates and all them, and they were alive today, that would be my answer. That would exactly be my answer. Who's to say in your puny brain that you understand the way the world works? You think you understand the world works. I think I understand the world works, how the world works. But I have evidence. I have good, solid evidence. Would they be willing to look at the evidence? Right? Most people, again, maybe Socrates would have said, yeah, let's look at the evidence. He wasn't interested. Right? He wasn't interested in looking at the evidence. Why? Because he wanted to do what he did. He wanted to live the life the way he wanted to. Because if he says that the Bible's true, then his life is restricted. And his life is restricted. He can't do what he wants. So today, we're going to multiply that by infinity. Because people, first of all, they don't care if it's true or not. They don't think you can't prove it. They're not interested in listening at all. So therefore, you're not going to get anywhere. They say, well, you think this is a miracle. Well, can you prove it otherwise? Look at all these missiles. Look at the existence of the Jewish people. Right? This is a good example. In existence, I did one show on Tanakh Talk. Showed all the wars that the Jewish people have gone through. From Egypt until the state of Israel. And all the wars and why they're still around. The only reason they're still around is because it's a miracle. They should have died out by the Babylonian destruction, right? By the Second Temple destruction. They should have died out. Then you had wars later, in the 1400s, 1500s, Inquisitions, all these different things. The Jewish people should have disappeared. No question about it. And a lot of secular, non-Jewish people have said the only reason the Jews exist is miraculous. They're still around. There's no question. Just by going through Jewish history. Now, I'm going to say that doesn't prove anything. If you take other nations that were taken out of their land, taken away their language, taken away all kinds of things, they didn't exist. They don't exist. They have disappeared. All these nations have disappeared. They were part of a melting pot, so to speak, or overtaken by that nation. They became part of that nation. Maybe a few of their customs. Maybe they were passed down. Maybe they were passed down. But essentially, they all assimilated out. They disappeared. They became part of a different culture, except the Jewish people. There's no other culture like that. You can do the research. Someone go do the research. Go see all these nations. All these peoples that disappeared over time.
Cultures,
right? They can be great nations, not just small nations. You got the Byzantines, you got the Greeks, all these people, these great nations disappeared, essentially disappeared. They got destroyed, right? Totally disappeared. Bottom line, you start up with the Jewish people, that's what's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen. But any nation been swallowed up by other nations and been beaten down, destroyed, throughout the millennium, the fact that they have survived, what's the explanation? You cannot say luck, right? Luck doesn't exist over here. And the reason is because you have so many times throughout history that's happened over and over and over. Destruction, pogroms, Holocaust, all these different things. The Jewish people should not exist at all, period. They shouldn't exist, right? So now you have to come up with an explanation, some sort of explanation how we still exist. You look what happened in Egypt. 80% got wiped out, right? You see after that, come into the land, there are wars. You got the first temple, they get thrown out, they get destroyed, come back, got the second temple, got destroyed. By that time that they got destroyed, shouldn't be anything left. Should not have been anything left, but somehow they're still around. So now, in each time where they got destroyed and they somehow regrouped, you have to come up with some explanation why they're still here. And you have to compare them to other nations that went through similar things, right? Somewhat similar things. Because any nation that got swallowed up by another nation, they disappeared. Their nationality disappeared, right? For the most part. They disappeared. Now, if you look at, again, you tell me it happened to one nation, a coincidence. Tell me it happened to two nations, a coincidence. Tell me it happened to 50,000 different nations that happened to, or 100, or whatever. And all of them end up in the same category. Gonzo, right? They got destroyed. So if they got destroyed, they don't exist. There's only one that does exist, 1 against 100. What are the odds? 0. The odds are 0 that this should ever happen. So you can't say it was luck. Luck is not going to do it. Luck, that would be, if you look at we'll use a sports parable here. You look at the NCAA tournament, right? The college tournament, 64 teams.
Final Four.
Yeah, what are the odds?
March Madness.
What are the odds that the 64th team beats the number 1 seed? About 0. It's about 0.
I don't know. Check Las Vegas odds.
Yeah, now the odds are pretty slim. Very, very slim. Now, can it happen? In theory, it could happen. Right?
Long shots, yeah.
Having like an Ivy League school, beat like the University of Kentucky, whatever. University of Pennsylvania, 1977, they made it to the Final Four, right? The same year as DePaul and Mark Aguirre and whatever. Dating myself a little bit. They miraculously made it to the Final Four, right? But that never happened, right? That was the year of Magic and Bird, right? I'm sorry, 1979. That was the year that Magic and Bird went to, Indiana State played Michigan State in the finals. The other two teams, anyone wants to look it up, my great knowledge here, was DePaul and the University of Pennsylvania. So you have an Ivy League school make it to the Final Four. What are the odds of that? Zero. Pretty much zero. They're not, they're not getting all this money for scholastics, all these different things. They're never gonna win, right? They're never gonna be the Final Four. Maybe they'll make it to the final, I don't know, 32. Maybe they'll win a game or two. Maybe. But they're not going to make it to the Final 8 or the Final 4. That's just not going to happen, right, in general. Now, could it be a fluke of history? Could be a fluke. It could be a fluke, but when you look at this and you see 99 times out of 100, all these other nations got wiped off the face of the map, you can't say this is a fluke. You can't say it's a fluke over here. Now, some people may say, well, maybe they got lucky. Maybe it was, right? But if you see how they survived, and the whole thing is all about Torah and about God and other things, okay, right? That's a different issue. But I don't want to digress here. The point is, if you only understand something with your mind, you don't see anything outside your mind, you are never going to see anything supernatural. Even if God would make a miracle right in front of your face.
Yeah, you'd deny it one way, shape, or form.
You are going to deny it in some way, shape, or form. Even if a person say, wow, that was a miracle. Even if they say the words, it doesn't mean anything in their heart. They're only saying it was a miracle, meaning I got lucky. Imagine, icy roads, someone skids, hits a tree, go flying out break the glass, the front shield, windshield or whatever, and basically you come out, without a scratch. The odds of that also pretty darn slim.
Oh, right? Rabbi, when I was 18, I fell 240 feet down a canyon and into big rocks. And I woke up down there face up in water. And, if I'd been sideways, I would have drowned, right? Or even face down, of course, I would have drowned. But I woke up that way, let alone survive. It was a full 15-story free fall, if you will. It was about 240 feet slide along the ledge and then about 150 feet straight free fall. And I was rescued by firefighters rappelling down. And to me, it was always miraculous. And, I've gone back to the location so many times and really tried to contemplate or understand what possibly could have happened based on the evidence. But in reality, it touches the very soul. There was something
so
for me miraculous
that a person may go through. Things that a person may go through. Mm-hmm. You have to see what it is. But today, again, things are clouded so much in nature. In nature in general, most people will not look at it as miracle. Someone has a biking accident, let's say. They're going down a hill, they can't pull the clutch, they take a turn too fast. They know it's happened to someone, a number of months ago, broke 6 vertebrae in the collarbone. Now, they were lucky because they didn't land on their head. Now, if they would have landed on their heads, who knows? Who knows what would have been, right? So, yeah, that was a wake-up call. I don't think there's any question. At the same time, convincing somebody is going to be very hard because you're arguing on 2 different planes. 2 totally different planes. What you're going to see is a miracle. This person will say, it could happen. 1 in a billion chance, but it could happen, right? Put it in a supercomputer, it could happen, right? Even if the odds are very slim, it doesn't matter. But why would they say that? They would say that, as we mentioned before, because they want to go according to whatever desires tell them. And they don't want to have to give in. And they don't want to have to say, the Torah might be true, the Bible thumpers might be true, and I have to change my life. Change my life. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. And what these philosophers did, and what people today, I don't think they're anywhere near close to the philosophers of the past. They're just going to do what they want to do, and they'll make up their own scenario. It did happen as a miracle. It didn't happen as a miracle. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There's no belief in God, very little belief in God. And certainly not a God who interferes in history, right? So if that's the case, people just want to do what they want to do. If they want to do what they want to do, right? That's why. So the Maram Shik says over here. That's why. We sort of mentioned the beginning, of all these videos on this Mishna, and that is what are people going to say? People are going to say that Hillel over here is talking about measure for measure. So how many people today, and I've heard it a lot, people ask the question, what's the measure for measure over here? Why am I going through this? Why am I going through that? And my answer would be, and it always is who's to say you're supposed to understand what the measure for measure is? Right? We want to get the message. We want to understand, at least to a certain extent, why we're going through what we're going through. Now, for many things, we're not going to understand. No matter how much we look into it, we're never going to understand. Some things might be a little bit more obvious, right? That, a person does X behavior. There could be repercussions straight away or shortly thereafter, right? A person, let's say, I've gotten this question a lot also, driving over the speed limit. How far over the speed limit is being considered reckless? Right? Now, if a person is reckless and they get in an accident or, they're going too fast and whatever happens, it's okay. There's a direct result because you're driving too fast. So if a person's reckless, it's your own fault. God didn't have to save you over here. He didn't have to stop you over here. Right? So we can do things that we can see at face value. We can see pretty clear. Right? I would say 99% of everything else is going to be so clouded, it's very hard. Very, very hard to make heads or tails. We're not going to understand it. But we have to also see, what did I gain? What did I gain from this experience? Right? I understand what I lost. I can easily understand what I lost. Question is, did I gain anything? Now, maybe a person goes through something, very hard, very difficult thing. But at the same time, different doors get open. Right? Totally outside of nature. Something that should never have happened. But because they went through certain things, other doors got open. Now, you can look at it one of two ways. Look what I lost. Look at the pain. Look at the difficulty. All true. At the same time, there's a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, because now certain things opened. Because certain things opened, you'll say, well, maybe what I went through, I don't understand to say why I went through it, but look at the end result. Now, I'm not saying the end result's always good. It may not be so good, but if there is something good, the person can still ask, okay, this happened from this. Why? Why did it happen? I don't know. Why did I have to go through the suffering? Who knows? Maybe God wanted to see more prayer, wanted to see you work harder. I mean, does it make any sense that the daughters of Lot, they think the world's destroyed, they're with their father, and through that the Messiah comes? A whole string of events. In the end result, future Messiah. There could be a lot of different, potential explanations. But we could go through a lot of different things, not have a clue why, but then it opens up doors in so many different ways. And then you say, oh, but this was really painful. You're right. It was really painful. But in the end, and it could be 20 years later. It could be 10 years later. Right? It could be, a lot of time after the fact that you went through this, and then that happened, this happened, 20,000 things happened, and then you got to where you are now. And now you say, okay, let me put the pieces together. And now when I put the pieces together, in hindsight, you say, hey, if I would have done this before, I wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have worked out the same. Right? Because you're lacking other things. Right? I see it in my own life. 20 years before, I had a learning center, other things. I had all kinds of plans. God said, no. He said, no, I'm going to nip in the bud. I'm going to stop it right now. Okay. So 18 years later, doing what I'm trying to do now, I'm much more well equipped to do it. I don't think there's any question based on life experience, other knowledge, different things. Now, you want to tell me 17 years before, I would have accomplished the same thing? Probably not. Right? Probably not. Not even my biggest ego? Probably not. But even if that would be the case, now I see clear I wouldn't have done what I wanted to do. It wouldn't have been the same. Wouldn't have been at the same level because of all these other things. But I could ask the question, so why did I have to go through in the first place? Why did I have to go through all these different, terms of events? Why did I have to go through it? Why I have to go to Chile? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I ended up in New Jersey after that, and that's how I got involved in converts. A number of years later, I got involved with Noahites, right? Continued to learn, develop other things. Okay, then it led me to different things. But I wouldn't have, going through hell, etc. I would have said, come on. Why you have X, Y, Z, and then A, B, C, D, E, F? Why do I have these other things coming now? Don't know. But, looking at it in hindsight, now I can see, okay, this had to happen in order for these other things to happen. Some of them I have no idea why, but these other things had to happen. Because if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have got involved, certainly with non-Jews. I wouldn't have got involved with converts. Maybe God could have done it a different way, probably. Right? But this is the way it happened, a whole roundabout way. And how I got involved in converts in general, by accident. I mean, nothing's by accident. Right? But seemingly by accident. Right? Someone called me up, asked me, if I could give classes to non-Jews, process of conversion, blah, blah, blah. And that's how it started. Right? Almost by accident. Wasn't something I planned on. And then they enjoyed the class. I took over this class, whatever. And that's how it got started. So that continued when I came back to Israel and I did other things. But if there's no straight line over here. There's a lot of suffering in between. And with all the suffering in between, I'd say, hey, why this, why that, why the other thing? I'm not saying I'm, tooting my own horn over here. But at the same time, I was thrown to the dogs. Literally thrown to the dogs on my knees a number of times. Right? But what about all the years of plenty? I should have spit in God's face. And I should have said, God forbid, it wasn't worth it. All the people I helped, I would have done that, would have lost every single mitzvah I ever did.
Wow.
Every single mitzvah I would have lost. Now, you don't spit in God's face when it's good, right? And when it's hard, okay, so God wants to stir us up, wants us to work hard, whatever he wants out of us. But in a million years, I never would have picked this scenario. Never. First of all, I didn't sign up for it. That's not what I signed up for. Okay, but this is the way God did it. So now I'm going to backtrack. Now, okay, I'm on survival mode. How am I going to pay bills? How am I going to do other things? This thing happened, was thrown in just like as a bonus, right? A totally thing out of the, totally, out of the norm.
Unexpected.
Out of the norm. And it enveloped and it developed, in all these things. But again, I wouldn't have thought about it in a million years. Never. Never. But God has his ways. He definitely has his ways. So why should I think? Why should I second guess? And this is really where it gets a little bit, as the English would say, a little bit dodgy, right? Why would I second guess how God runs the world? When there were a lot of bus bombings here in Israel in the 90s, right? Or the early 2000s. People were afraid to get on buses because, buses on a daily basis getting blown up. So I asked my Rabbi about it. Politically like this, I was much into politics when I was younger. And he said, forget about that. If you're happy with, so he asked me, you happy 95% of the time the way God runs the world? So I said, yeah, I guess I'm happy. So he goes, the other 5% you won't understand 10 lifetimes. He said, forget about it. Your job is to sit and learn. That's what you're supposed to do. You let God do what he needs to do. You do what you're supposed to do. But you're going to say, come on, go through a lot of suffering, a whole lot of different things that I'm not equipped to deal with.
People want to control too much, and it drives them nuts.
No, that's it. That's so... Everybody goes through difficulty, and I will tell you 99% of the time, you'll never understand why. And it's very simple. And again, I've spoken about this a lot, but it needs to be repeated. And that is that, first of all, who are we to say or think that I understand God's thinking? That I'm in God's head. If Moshe Rabbeinu had the 48th level of understanding, the highest level of understanding is 49. If he was one level below and God says, you can't understand me and live. You can't see how I run the world and live. Right? It's not going to happen. You understand it after the fact. You understand it, after 120 years, whatever the case is, but you're not going to understand it now. But we want to be in control. We can't even control a bowel movement. How much control do we think we really have, right, in general? But people want to know. People want to understand. But I would say like this. If we would go through, before a person goes to sleep, if a person would think what they did during the day, right? And I'm not going to go too graphic into detail because I don't want to destroy people here. Think about what you've done during the day, right? How you interacted with others. If you prayed, your relationship to God, all these different things, right? You go through on a daily basis what you did, what you accomplished, and then see if what you did, how many things you did that were good, how many things that were bad. Now, there are multiple levels. Multiple levels depending on where the person is holding, right? So we saw by the flood, the Torah says that Noah, beginning of the parsha of Noah we just read, Noah was righteous in his generation. So Rashi brings down two opinions. One opinion was if he was that he was only great in his generation, right? If he would have been in Abraham's generation, wouldn't have been as great. Other opinion is no. Had he been in Abraham's generation, he would have been even greater, right? Because it's only according to his generation. So I saw brought down that says Mori Rabbi, Rabbi going to Moshe, this should be well. And he brings down the following. He brings down from the Maral of Prague. The Maral of Prague says, what's the difference between the one who praises him, praises Noah, and the one that disses him, right? And says that he wouldn't have been so great. But they really agree that he was great, right? The Torah tells me he was righteous. He was righteous. The question is, what does in his generations mean? But everybody agrees he's righteous. So why don't you think, had he been in the generation of Abraham, he would have amounted to nothing? So what do we look at greatness? We look at greatness according to where we're holding right now. According to the generation. In other words, in this generation, a person is keeping Torah mitzvahs. Yeah. Is he keeping Torah mitzvahs like previous generations? No. Previous generations, someone had sinned, they would fast for 3 days. Right? They would do all kinds of things in order to uproot the sin. Today is a lot easier to repent. In general, we're not doing that. Right? We're not rolling around in the snow in a tank top and shorts, and we're not fasting twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever. We're not doing that. We're not holding there. Right? God is not going to hit us where we're not holding. He's going to hit us exactly where we are holding. Right? In that generation. So it could be that even in a previous generation, or a greater generation, maybe it would have been as great. Right? Maybe himself it wouldn't have been as great, but that's not the question. The question is, how does he add up right now? Forget about future. How does he add up right now? Right now he's great, but that can be relative. Someone can be great today, compared to previous generations, might not have been nothing. Right? I'll give an example. To get into the yeshiva in Baranovich, Rabbi Wasserman, who was the famous student, one of the famous students of the Chofetz Chaim, Shem Yikam Damot, right? That God should avenge his blood, right? And to get into his yeshiva, the 14-year-old kid, 15-year-old kid, they had to know 200 pages of Talmud front and back, right? By Rabbi Chanan's yeshiva in Baranovich. 200 pages front and back. They had to know cold. How many people today can say they know 200 pages back and forth cold of Talmud? That's like 2 or 3, different tractates together. Like I know them backwards and forwards in their commentaries. I'm not saying there aren't people that do. Not saying not certainly not a 14-year-old kid, not a 15-year-old kid. I don't think there's any question. There's no question. But we're living in a different generation. Total different generation. So you take someone today, you're going to say, well, it's a miracle they're religious in a lot of ways. It's a miracle they can learn. I heard a great mashkiach, a great spiritual mentor of yeshiva say, listen, if you understand one of the commentaries on the page, And you understand it well, go have a piece of chocolate. Go eat an apple. Give yourself a pat in the back. That's where this generation's holding. So it's about where we're holding now. We learned it out from Yishmael. Yishmael is dying. So the angels say, let him die. God says, liable? Not liable. He's a child. But look what he's going to do in the future. Look what his offspring are going to do in the future, Jewish people. He's not liable now. Doesn't matter what the future is going to bring. Right? So even if you say future generations are going to be much greater, you don't judge him according to future generations. You judge him right now. So right now, he would have been considered great. But you know what? Even in that generation, he would have been considered something. Very hard to say would have been considered nothing. Right? There's no way how to answer this question that even in that generation, they would all agree it would have been something. Maybe it wouldn't have been as great, but it certainly would have been worse. Certainly wouldn't have been worse. Right? So the question is, okay, how do we view it? So we have to cut ourselves a little bit of slack. We're not living in a generation we see God's ways. We don't understand hiddenness within hiddenness. But I would venture to say, as I said earlier, take stock. Take stock of what you've done during the day. Any day, take stock at the end of the day of what you did. Your relationship to God, interpersonal relationships, how you spoke, how you spent your time, all these different things, and then really put it to a grind, because there are different levels over here depending where a person's holding. But even so, if we think about it at face value, how many people are going to come out squeaky clean? You look into, let's say, 30 different things during the day. How many people are going to hit 30 for 30? Come on, in the ego of all egos, if a person prayed 3 times a day, let's say, you prayed 3 times a day, where was your mind when you prayed? And if you pray in the morning, it take you 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, and you go through the words, you said the words, how much of an effect did it have on you? Did you really think about what you were saying, or were you just moving along, just doing things by rote? The afternoon, evening service, okay, takes 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. It takes a lot less time. Where's your mind? Where's your mind when you're praying? Where's your mind when you're learning? I had something today. I was learning something. I read through a whole paragraph. I had to go back. My mind was somewhere else. I had to go back and reread it. And obviously, when I read the first time, I didn't get what I was supposed to get out of it because I didn't read the words. I looked at the words, but I didn't learn them. I didn't think about them, etc. So if a person would do that, let's say you only looked at 10 things, potential things that you did. If you're really, really honest, without being brutal, you wouldn't get out of bed. You'd be so embarrassed. You're right, but again, if we look at what we do on a normal basis, on a daily basis, again, how we interacted with others, how I prayed, say blessing, whatever it is that has to do with spirituality. How in the world can a person think, I got a 95, I did okay? The worst thing a person can do is say when they prayed, God's going to answer my prayers because I prayed very well. God's going to be so proud of me. I prayed so well. Right? So the Talmud on that says, well, if you do that, God's going to open up your file. God's going to take you apart and say, oh, really? You think you prayed so well? You deserve that I should answer you and answer what you want? Let's see where you're holding. Let's see where how does the person have that much gaiva? How
can a person be that conceited? Again, right?
How can the person be that conceited and think that God should answer my prayers because I prayed so well? And then God opens up your file. The only time you ever want God to open up your file is on Rosh Hashanah. That's it. You don't want your file opened up any other time during the year. Because who's gonna be able to pass? Who's gonna pass the scrutiny? Now, I am not saying by any stretch difficulty we go through, and all that. I'm not saying, well, you just blow it off. They I can't figure it out anyway, whatever. It's painful. We go through a lot of pain. There are a lot of mood swings we go through in a day, right, on a daily basis. There's no question. We react to all kinds of different things, many different ways. Good. Right? But at the same time, aren't there things that we do that probably cause it? Now, it's not going to be direct. It may not be something I did today. It could have been something I did 6 months ago. God said, okay, I'm going to hit you now. Could have been something a week ago, a month ago. You're never going to know. You're absolutely never going to know. And if you're never going to know, that's what the Maram Shik here says. Don't try and delve into it. Why? Because it's just you're going to do what your desires tell you anyway. Because it's going to lead us to say, well, I can only understand things that my mind understands. This I don't understand. I'm not such a bad person. Right? If you read the book, which I don't recommend, person ever reads the book when bad things happen to good people. Right? Harold Kushner, his son died of progeria. Terrible disease. Right? The disease where you're a 10-year-old, the body of an 80-year-old. It's a terrible disease. No one should ever have to go through. And what happened? He said, I'm not so bad. My wife's not so bad. It must be. Stuff happens. That was his conclusion. God's not in charge of the world. Well, that's heresy. Obviously, he didn't read the end of the book of Job, right? And where Job gets chastised by God. But okay, right? No one, again, I'm not judging here. I'm not judging going through such a difficult thing. I'm judging the reaction, right? The reaction is heresy. It's 100% heresy. But he made people feel good to say, well, God's not in charge, so whatever happens, stuff happens. And that's the way it is. He's not in control, right? And God's not in control. It could be your bad luck, But the bottom line is to sit there and delve into it. And you're right. We want answers. We want absolute answers. Why this happened, why that happened. You know what? There aren't. We don't have answers. God's not speaking to us. Now, I would say some things I think are a little more obvious than others, but 99% of everything is so hidden, even within nature, we're never, ever, ever going to understand why. We're not. But I'm in pain. No one's denying the pain. No one is denying the difficulty. Understanding the measure for measure is going to drive you absolutely nuts. And you're not going to come up with the right conclusion. That I can promise you. You will. I won't say never. Most likely you're not going to come up with the right answer of why. Now I would venture to say. Now this is only me, but I would venture to say. Let's say somebody will. They'll have a dream. God will come to them in a dream, and they'll tell them, why you had to go through this, that, and the other thing. But let's say it's something that they themselves caused. And they were so egregious in something, God said, okay, I hit you with this, I hit you with that, and I hit you with 3 other things. Now, I would ask the question, and you can look at it 2 different ways. I would ask the question, if someone was given that answer and they had absolute clarity, how happy is someone going to be knowing that? They're not going to beat themselves up even more and say, how could I have been so stupid? How could I have done this? And look at all these repercussions. Now, on the one hand, I would say people are going to beat themselves up. They'll drive themselves even more nuts.
Oh,
why? Yeah. They'll say, I was careless. I was callous. I shouldn't have done it. It was a spur of the moment. I wasn't thinking. They'll beat themselves up more. On the other hand, someone may say, no, you know what? Now that I know, and now that I have what to work on, and now I have a certain level of clarity, that gives me fuel for the future. Part of me says, a very strong part of me says that it's not going to be the latter. It's going to be the first part. That a person's going to get depressed. They're going to realize, I made mistakes, and look at what the repercussions are. And why should I even bother trying? Because I'm probably going to make another mistake like that. I was tired, and I wasn't thinking. Really, I should have been under onus. But you weren't. You weren't under onus over here. No one put a gun to your head. You did what you did. You said what you said. So there are repercussions. So a slip of the tongue, right, which we mentioned before, Mr. Edelman, we'll call him out again, right? The basketball player says something, slip of the tongue. No such thing, because it's already part of you. It's already what you think. Now it's just a question if it comes out, if it comes out or not. So a person can make that mistake and say, oh, I shouldn't have said it, whatever, regardless, but that's who you are. You are racist, really, you are, but not so many people know it because you don't speak about it. You don't say things about it, but it's there. So God said, okay, I'm just going to bring it out. I'm going to ruin you. So there are a lot of things that we go through. Again, we have no control. We absolutely have no control. We have no knowledge of the repercussions of what it does. Some things, probably a little more obvious, but many, many things we don't have control. And if we don't have control, and as you said before, if we don't have control, we want to be controlling. We want to have a lot more control, but we don't. And I think people would understand, would have it easier if they realize that the control that we really have is about zero. We're not really in control of anything. Very little when it comes to free will. We're not in control of who our parents are, who our siblings are, socioeconomic situation, many things. We're not in control. Can't control the body, right? How can a person control, if they're gonna get cancer or not? They have no control. They'll say, no, I only eat healthy. Macrobiotics, I wash my hands 10 times a day. I do this, I do that. Right? A friend of mine, told me a story. I've heard the story before. But a woman died in the early 60s, cancer. But they were very healthy, organic, macrobiotic, all these different things. She got cancer and died. And there can be someone who lives to their 80s, mid 90s. They smoke every day, right? And they smoke like a fiend. Why didn't it affect them the same way, like everyone else? Because God didn't want to take them. He didn't want it to affect them that way. But are we in control? We're not in control. And we have to put our best foot forward. We have to work hard. There are many things that we have to do. That's true. But we have to be able to let go and say, I am not in control.
Right.
I'm not in control if I'm in line.
And the cashier stubborn males.
Yeah, I'm not in control, if I'm standing in line in the supermarket, and there's a problem with the computer, with the cash register. You're not in control if they decide to close up and then you have to wait for them to switch over. There are a million things. You're not in control if someone, drives like a maniac on the road. You're not in control of that. There are a million things we're not in control of. We have to be able to say God runs the world.
Amen.
And hopefully we react the way we should. And good things happen, and good things based on our good action should happen, but there are other things that can happen. A person has to let go. And that the problem is that when we see things that are bad and things that are difficult that either other people go through, we ourselves go through, and we believe God is good, and we believe we're saying the mantra every day, God is the one in control, okay, but if God is in control, why does this happen? We still ask the question. People are still going to ask the question. That means we have to work on our emunah.
Yeah.
We have to work on our emunah. That whatever God does, God does. Right? As my Rabbi told me, God runs the world. He's in charge. You don't have a say.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're happy, he runs the world most of the time. The other things, don't worry about it. Do we have to be better? Yeah. Do we have to work harder? Yeah. What do we have to work on? Everything. Not an easy thing, right? But if we're going to sit there and, be picayune about the details and why this and why that, you'll never live in this world. You'll never survive in this world.
You drive yourself nuts.
You'll drive yourself nuts, and you'll say, well, the problem really is, and I understand why people want control, but what a person's saying is, I should be able to understand how God runs the world. That's what they're saying. Even if they don't say it out loud, it doesn't matter. They're saying I should understand what God does. And who's to say? God already said to Moshe Rabbeinu, you're not going to understand. It's an impossibility. If that is the case, where do we have the gall? And I think it's a gall to a certain extent. And it only happens because a person's in pain. But, I do understand where it comes from. But it's an absolute chutzpah to question God why he does what he does. It's a chutzpah. I think it's a chutzpah. And the reason is because he runs the world. You don't like it? Well, that's your problem, right? You have difficulty, you're right. So you have to work through it. And you understand it comes from God. I get it. But who are we to ask the question? That, it's an age-old question. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's an age-old question. But that's, you're bringing in an assumption and it's a good assumption that God is all good. So if God is all good, why does this happen? Right? That's really what's behind the question. But what's behind that question is that what we see is bad. Who says it's really bad? In God's eyes, there is no bad. It's all good. We just don't see it as good. right? One day we're going to be able to make the blessing on things that happened that were bad on something that was good. But that's only when we can see things in a more clear way. So if that's the case, if I were God, which I always say, if I were God, I had my special glasses, my special funny mustache, right? I would say, like God chastised Job. And I wouldn't even be that nice. I would say, I give you air, I give you food, I give you the ability to live in this world. I give you so many things. Who in the world are you to question me at all? That's what I would say. You don't have a leg to stand on. Zero. I'm not saying you're not going through difficulty. I'm not pushing that to the side. We all go through difficulties, right? But at the end, to understand everything, you don't have the brain capacity. You don't have. You would need a 300 IQ or more. Yeah, but it's not. And even if you had that, God's not going to give you that information. It's an impossibility. You only understand things well after the fact, if that. If that. You may never understand. So I say, what, I can't question? Again, if God is the master of masters, God is the one in charge. Well, isn't he doing this for a reason? He's not doing it because he wants to spit in your face. He wants you to become better. Yeah, but this is hard. And, all these, you're right. There are a lot of things, a lot of hardship we go through. But that's what makes us who we are. And some people have to go through more difficult hardships than maybe other people have to. That has to do with their soul, what has to be fixed up, could be any number of things. But there are many, many things that we go through that we do to ourselves. And God is reacting to what we do. And again, if I don't do this to myself because, I always say, do as I say, not as I do. Why do I say I don't do it to myself? Because I know there are a million things I probably do wrong during the day. And thoughts and actions and different things. And if something happens in a negative way, how am I going to take it? Because I did something. I obviously did something to deserve it. I'm not going to say, well, I'm perfect, and I didn't do anything wrong. You really think you didn't do anything wrong? If you would scrutinize, which most people won't because then they'll feel like a piece of dirt, but if you would scrutinize, go through the list of confessions that we say on Yom Kippur. Go back and look at the list. Most of them are how we react to other people, what we say. Things that we say. Most of the things come out that we beat our chest for, things that we say. Now, you want to tell me you're in total control? Every last thing you said during the day, no issues. No issues at all. And even if they weren't issues, what about what you thought? What about purification of thought? That's why when you read Path of the Just, you should give a class on Path of the Just. You're not going to get passed through a quarter of the book. You're going to say no one's holding at this level today. Purity. Talking about purity of thoughts. Forget purity of thought. Carefulness. How many people are careful the way they think, what they do? There are many, many different levels. Most people don't get past that. They don't, they get the purity. It's already beyond them. Right? We're not holding there. It doesn't matter. We still have to try. We still have to work. So there are so many things we fail at. To me, I don't see why people are going to have the question in the first place. Because we're already starting at a deficit. If we're already starting at a deficit, the only question is, how far am I working up? So you say I'm working hard and I'm striving and whatever. In this tissue generation, we don't get very far. We don't get to high levels. Okay. For us, it might be a high level. Previous generations may look like nothing. But my question is, and I'll ask myself the same thing. I'm not going to single myself out here, right? Who are we to say anything? Right? Who are we to say we're perfect in so many different ways? Right? I could sit here till tomorrow because we don't have enough time. I could sit here till tomorrow, give you a list of 100 things. 100 things that, a person does on a daily basis. I want to see how many people are going to get a 50. A 50. According to me, Mr. George Burns with my funny glasses. No one is going to get a 50 in general. You might have some righteous people, they'll score higher. Okay. Right? But if we're going to scrutinize and you wonder why these things happen, you have to look in the mirror and honestly assess. You can't say, well, I think I'm a good person, so what's going on over here? We're not going to quote Kushner over here. That's heresy. Right? God wants you to try. God wants you to go in the right direction. He wants you to work hard. Now, that doesn't mean we always reach what we should. And if we don't and we fail, it's payback. there's going to be payback. But I don't think anybody listening, I don't think anybody can say with a straight face, I'm good. I don't have anything
Not
to work
if they're
on.
honest with themselves.
If they're honest, if they're honest, they're never going to say that. Why not? Because they know. They know deep down it's a miracle they're still alive. It's a miracle. Why should God keep you alive if you spit in his face enough times? I'm not talking about high spiritual levels here. I'm talking about normal things. You make blessings, you spit them out. For example, no pun intended. You didn't have proper intentions, but you do it on a regular basis. Hundreds and thousands of blessings. Prayers that we say, our mind somewhere else. You're going to say, well, God's going to cut me some slack. Oh, really? He's giving you a golden opportunity to pray to him. He's giving you a golden opportunity. What's the first thing we say in the Shemona Esrei? Silent meditation. We say the God of our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. We butter God up because we don't have our own coattails. We're relying on their coattails. And then when we give our credentials, then we can pray for our needs. We cannot pray for our needs based on our own credentials. We don't have credentials. We have zero credentials over here. Anyone thinks they do? Again, I'm not beating people down to beat them down. I want you to see what reality is. And I'm not downplaying the fact that people don't suffer and that people don't go through difficulty. And in all that, we all do. Some have it worse. Some have it a little bit better. We're all tossed around in different ways, right? A person suffers when they put their hand in the pocket and they take out the wrong coin. That's also a form of suffering. You say, I'll take that suffering anytime. Yeah, and people will say, I'd love to have coins in my pocket. I mean, Rabbi says money's not everything, but it's good to have in your pocket also, right? But, I think in many ways it's the ultimate in chutzpah for someone to say, I want to understand how God works. We're not holding there. God doesn't owe us anything.
Of course
right?
not.
He absolutely owes us nothing. That's why the Avos of Avos says, as we're going to see in the next Mishna, or next few Mishnayos, we're going to see one day, God says, the Mishnah says, why are you going to think you're so great? You learned a lot of Torah. Why are you going to think you're so great? That's what you're created to do. Right? That's what you're created to do. So if that's what you're created to do, why should you get reward? Everybody knows, right? They're going to get reward in a portion of the next world. Why are they going to get reward for what they've done? They don't deserve reward.
Yeah,
why? Because that's what you're created to do. That's what you're created to do. So it comes on the Avos of Avos. Says in duties of the heart. Says the Avos of Avos. So why do you get reward? You know why you get reward? Because God does a chesed. He does an act of loving kindness. In my language, remember those, so I grew up with hoodsies. Anyone from Boston knows what a hoodsie is, right? It's a Dixie cup, half chocolate, half vanilla ice cream, made by Hood. It's called a hoodsie. So God says, you know what? You did the mitzvah very well. I'm going to give you a hoodsie, right? I'm going to give you a chocolate bar. I'm going to give you, good halftime show for the CFL. I'm going to give you all these good things, right? Because you did what I said to do. Why does God do that? Why does he do it? Because the Avos of Avos says, because it's a chesed. Does God owe you anything? He owes you nothing. He gives you life, gives you food, gives you drink, allows you to live in this world. He gives you everything. He gives you everything. You want reward also? Don't be a pig. Why in the world do you deserve reward? That's what you're created to do. If that's what you're created to do, he doesn't owe you anything. Why does he give you? He gives you because it's a chesed. It's an act of loving kindness. But the reality is, and we'll speak about this, sometime in the future, that God, that's what you're created to do. So you're going to say, Coffman, you got all this knowledge, and you learn this, and you learn that, and all these things, and you want reward also? Don't be a pig. That's what you're created to do. And you're not even fulfilling half of what you could do. You're always scratching the surface. That's all we do, right? There's so much more. I should be, studying 15 hours a day, getting 3 hours of sleep. It's what I should be doing. Body couldn't take it, right? Wouldn't be able to do it. But in general, are we doing what we're supposed to do 100% of the time? No. Are we reaching whatever potential we have? Hopefully. Hopefully we're working hard. But the Avos of Avos says you're not doing a quarter of what God expects. Not a quarter. If you're not doing a quarter of what God expects, how in the world can a person think nothing bad should ever happen to me? So you'll say, I don't think nothing bad should happen. I just don't think it should be this bad. I don't think I should have to go through this or go through that. But again,
Yeah, we're so sensitive.
But again, you're doing 25% of what you're obligated to do. So what does God do? God has mercy. He can make it a lot worse, right? I'm not going to open my mouth to Mr. S over here. If God wanted to, he can make it a lot worse. A heck of a lot worse.
Yeah,
if
we
he
see in
wanted.
the book of Job.
So you say, well, it's pretty bad. And I went through a long time. It was one thing bad to the next. Embarrassment, this, all kinds of things, right? Till finally, years later, years later, saw a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, right? But that didn't weaken my resolve. I had no idea why to go through it. In general, and I'll never figure it out. They're gonna, I could say maybe it's for this, maybe it's for that. There could be a million things, a million things why. But the closer you are to the king, the worse it is. So now you're going in the right path. You had it, and so people say, but when I was a non-Jew, still a non-Jew, but before I was going the process of conversion, livelihood was easier. This was easier. There are many things that are easier. Why? So why is it so hard now as a Jew in training, or even as the Noahide, they get tossed around?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard? Because now you understand what the truth is, and once you understand the truth, now there's reward and punishment. Now God says, oh, now you've seen the light, right? So forget about what happened in the past. Like my Rabbi said, you live in the past, you have no future. Forget about the past. Now it's all about, you understand what the right thing is? So now why aren't you doing it? So why aren't you doing it? You lazy bum. Why aren't you doing it? You say, but I'm still not there. I'm a work in progress. How long am I going to be a work in progress? My whole life. Okay. Right? But there are things you shouldn't be doing. There are obvious things you shouldn't be doing. I'm not going to say non-obvious things. Obvious things that you shouldn't be doing. And we always have to ask the question, is this good for my soul? Is it bad for my soul? If I have a doubt, I have to ask a question. But if I know it's good or bad, okay. Right? Not everything good is really good. That's the whole thing going, according to your evil inclination. It may not be so good, but let's say I'm going in the right path. I'm doing the right thing. Now I have greater responsibility. Now I'm moving up the chain. Let's say in a corporate way, I'm moving up the chain. So if I'm moving up the chain, now I got a better position. You make a mistake like you did while you were the water boy, right? You were the ball boy over here. Nobody cares. Oh, you're an executive? You get a higher position? It's a lot worse. Because now, it's a company label. Now you're making us look bad. Now you're doing other things. Oh, if that's the case, greater responsibility means you're in trouble. Because now I know better. Now I'm held to a higher standard. And when I'm held to a higher standard, then things I did before, God wouldn't even look at. God wouldn't even care about. But now so it's a catch-22, right? Because now that I know better, it's worse. Because now I have greater responsibility. So now if I have greater responsibility, a person can't say, I'm good. I'm doing pretty good. Like an 18-year-old once told me, I'm holding better than 95% of world Jewry. You got to cut me some slack. I said, let's say I agree, but let's say God doesn't agree. Let's say God disagrees. You have higher potential. You're toast. Because now you're closer to the king. You got greater responsibility. You can't just say, I'm happy being mediocre. How many mediocre people out there are going to get a job? And, by telling their prospective employer, I'm good. What good traits do you have? In working, whatever. I don't know. I'm just mediocre. Next. I'm a mediocre, you're a car salesman. Someone comes to you for a job and say, oh, what do you know about selling cars? I don't know, but, most things I do are mediocre. You're never going to hire this person, ever. Why? Because he does things in a blasé way. He just goes through the motions. Is he ever going to sell a car? Let's see what he can do. Maybe someone will have mercy on it. Okay, let's see. A customer comes in, let's see. Let's see what you can do. He just goes and say, hi, how are you? Like, you're not excited.
No, I've had to train several over the years.
It's over. You're never going to sell anything. You're never going to sell anything. So if you go through life that way, and you're talking about the King of Kings, and you're talking about the fact that God rewards and punishes, why do you think it's okay? Why do you think I'm holding better than 95% of world Jewry? Even if that was true. But if you have greater potential, you can't rest on that. You can't rest on your laurels. It's over. Right? Why is God going to have mercy?
Question on YouTube, Rabbi. Can you take a question?
Ahead.
Kamal's asking, he says, is having chutzpah to Hashem a sin? Does a person have to do teshuvah for it?
Yes, 100%. There's no question, right? It has to, it has to be true chutzpah, though. If it's something someone asks a question and they're not sure, whatever. Yeah, but if they spit in God's face, right, and they say, oh, God is terrible, he's doing this, God forbid, or I don't like the way he's doing this, or whatever the case is, of course that's chutzpah. I think it's chutzpah as well. I mentioned, I think it's chutzpah as well to think we can understand God's ways. God is infinite, right? God is infinite. If God is infinite and he runs the world however he decides to run it, that's the first Rashi in Chumash, right? The first Rashi in Chumash is, why did the Torah start with Genesis, creation of the world? Why did it start with the first mitzvah? So the non-Jews can't come and say, hey, you stole our land, right? Because God giveth, God taketh away, because God created the world, right? I don't know how that's going to be such an answer if they don't really believe in that, but whatever. But in general, the question is going to be, you stole over here. The land's not theirs. The land is taken from the Canaanites, the Jezites, all the different, the Hittites. God took their land, right? He gave it to the Jewish people. Very good. So what would I say? Coffman would say, so take the land back. First of all, there are no Hittites and there are no any of these other people, whatever. They're not around anymore. But when they were around, let them take it back. Oh, they couldn't take it back because the Jewish people were too strong. Not my problem, right? The land of Israel would be, God forbid, the only land that was ever, a lot of it won in a defensive war that God forbid they have to give back, right? Never in the history of man has that ever happened, right? If you look at history in general. But that being the case, what do we have over here? So what do we have? So I would say, okay, if a bully comes to you and he starts shaking you down for lunch money, if you can beat the bully up, he's not going to bother you anymore, right? You take care of the bully, he's not going to, okay. So Israel, we're the big bully, so take us down. So you want to take the land back? Go ahead, come get it. Oh, you got nuclear weapons. You got a good army. You got this. Okay, so what? So come take it. Oh, you can't take it? That's too bad. So the land belongs to us. Might makes right. Might makes right over here. So if God decides who he's going to give the land to, or who he's not going to give the land to, right? If he wants us to have it, we'll have it. If not, we'll be thrown out, which we have been. And there is a medrash that says when the Messiah comes, we're not going to be. We'll be in the desert. Right? There is such a medrash. Now, hard to imagine that happening. The Jewish people being thrown out of the land of Israel. Who knows? But if that's what God wants, and he wants it to be overtaken and thrown out, or give the land back and make sure it's never defensible, okay, that could happen. That essentially could happen. But again, if God giveth and God taketh away, then whatever God does, he does. So and it doesn't really matter what we go through over here. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how difficult it is. God is squeezing us for who knows what reason. And it could be part of what's happening is to see, okay, what's this person going to do? Are they going to praise me? Are they going to still, are they still going to pray to me? God can say, okay, Mr. S says, let's get Coffman over here. We're going to, he hasn't been so grateful for everything we've given, that you've given him. So let's take it away, and let's see if he's going to blaspheme over here. All right, put me in the category of Job, right? Is he going to blaspheme? Never happened, right? I'm saying I had good days, I had bad days, but, I never said anything, at least I don't remember anyway, that, it's got, it's something that, I didn't deserve, and God doesn't know what he's doing. God forbid, I would have lost all my mitzvahs right there, right? But, again, I'm not tooting my own horn here. Everyone goes through their own difficulties. There's no question. Who are we to question, though? There's a lot of good. People just don't see the good. They just ignore the good. The glass is half full. It's half empty, not half full. And, this is not, again, because I don't want someone hammering me here, this is not to downplay difficulties people go through. Everybody goes through difficulties. There's no question. The question is, what does it do for us? How, I made a video this week, on YouTube on, about Noah getting drunk. One explanation is because Noah survived and his family survived and he came out, the world was devastated, right? The world's destroyed, When he gets out of the ark, he's devastated, totally devastated. So what does he do? He kicks back and he gets drunk. So one explanation is he couldn't deal with what he saw. Friends, family, destroyed.
All gone. Yeah.
Right, it's all gone. On the other hand, there are people that go through terrible tragedies and they make themselves great through it. Ordinary people. Right? And I mentioned there was a case of Kobe Mandel. Kobe Mandel was a 13-year-old that was killed, and terrorists killed him. Right? He was near his house in a cave. Terrorists attacked him. And they killed him. And his parents went through an unbelievable tragedy. But what they did, they've been having a summer camp for years for kids that, families gone through tragedy, terrorist attacks, all kinds of things. Now, they could have wallowed in self-pity. Never, maybe they're on certain drugs, keep them happy every day. I don't know. I don't know them personally, but they were ordinary people. They were ordinary people that raised themselves to such a high level. But okay, this was a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. There's no question. And at the same time, they turned that tragedy into giving to others, into helping others who've gone through tragedy. These were righteous people. These were ordinary people, right? Ordinary people, but that's how they dealt with it. Now, other people may wallow in self-pity, have difficulty their whole lives, may be addicted to drugs, may have difficulty getting out of bed. One of their kids is brutally murdered. It makes perfect sense, right? We can't judge that. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, PTSD.
But the question is how they deal with it, and they dealt with it on such a high level. How many people would deal with it in the same way? I don't know. I'm not saying probably too many because it's a hard thing to deal with, right? But the question is, okay, how do we look at that? So my point of this video is, how do we look at what happens? Do we look at it as, woe to me, I'm going to get plastered, that's how I'm going to deal with life? Or do we look at, okay, this happened, it was tragic, it was traumatic, it was hard, how am I going to get over it? How am I going to get to the other side? How am I going to move on? And someone will tell me, some people will say, sometimes you never move on because that's still a part of you. You never uproot it altogether. Very well could be, right? You tell a parent who lost a child, they have these summer camps, whatever. Do they ever think one day about that child? Of course they do. And if they relive the pain, it's probably very hard for them. Mm-hmm. It's probably very hard for them, but they channeled it in a different way. Now, they may be superhuman. Not everyone is superhuman per se. The question is, and my point is how do we view it? Do we view it as something where, it's going to destroy me my whole life? Right? Or do I look at it, okay, it was tragic, it was traumatic. Now let me, try and find a way to get over it, or try and, at least get past it, try and live. And at the same time, the same time, have a productive life.
Right.
Now, it doesn't always happen. People go through certain tragedies, and it's
they can't recover.
Certain traumatic events, and they just never recover from it. Now, it's understandable. I'm not saying not. I'm not saying not. The question is, it's how it's dealt with, and that's actually something I'm going to speak about tomorrow, more in depth about mental illness. Right, and mental illness and how that plays a role, how that affects us, or how that could affect us. Don't you have something
coming up with Noahide Nations? I noticed a couple people talk about that here in the chat room. You've got
So in 2 weeks, I think it's in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we're planning to do a class on Noahides. On about the Noahide laws. So yours truly is going to be giving this class. It's going to be live on YouTube. It's going to be free. Actually, it's going to be a free class. Going through, basically going soup to nuts, through the Noahide laws. Yeah. But, again, a person has to understand that, and that's why I called it a chutzpah, and that is that going through tragedy and going through difficulty, which this topic comes up a lot, going through it and trying to say, well, I want to understand why I had to go through it, I think it's the ultimate in chutzpah. And the reason is because if God put you in this path, and forget you did it to yourself. Let's say you had to go through it because your soul has to go through it. For whatever reason, your soul has to go through it. So now you want to question God and say, why do I didn't do this? My soul had to come back in order to go through it. We're not going to understand. We're not going to have that level of clarity, right? So a person just, I would say, just forget about it, somehow try and move on from that aspect. Because a lot of times it's not going to, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the person going, whatever path they're going on, they're not going to figure it out anyway, right? And if they're not going to figure it out, there's no point. There's 0 point to even try. And for a person to say, I want to understand, think about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, 48 out of 49 levels of understanding. And God says, no one will ever see my face and live. Now, if somebody wants to try and tell me, and this might be a little bit hard to hear, but if someone really wants to tell me they're on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, I think you're sick in the head.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely sick in the head. You should see a psychiatrist, a frum psychiatrist. Nobody's on that level. Nobody. Not in this generation, not in previous generations. Nobody's on that level, right? So I would say get it out of your head somehow, some way. I don't care how it's done, but don't think in your right mind you're on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. You're not. You're not on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. Nothing to talk about. Nobody. Not this entire generation combined. Not previous generations. Nobody's ever been greater than him. Nobody. So who are you to say I'm on that level? I want to know. Now, I understand where it comes from. I understand why we want to be in control, why we want to understand. If you're comparing yourself to Moshe Rabbeinu, just stop. You're not on that level. Nobody's on that level. It doesn't mean we didn't go through trauma. Doesn't mean we don't have difficulties. Doesn't mean any of these things, right? But if Moshe Rabbeinu himself couldn't understand, who are we? We're nobody. Like my Rabbi said, when it comes to, understanding what type of body that a person is going to have by resurrection of the dead. And he said, it's going to be a different type of body. And I said, and? He said, it's going to be a different type of body. And I said, and? And he said, I've never met anyone in that world that's come back and said, right? And has told me. And he knows everything about everything. So he's probably hiding things from me anyway. But in general, he's saying what? What? He's saying what? I know any better? Diane Fisher, or blessed memory of Israel Yaakov Fisher. I'll end with this, that the Talmud says what's going to help us by Chevre Mashiach, by the birth pains of the Messiah. What's going to help us? What should we do? Torah? We should learn Torah, a lot of Torah, and be involved in acts of loving kindness. Torah and Gimel Chesed. So he was also very sharp. Very, very sharp. And I said, and he started screaming at me. He's like,
whoa.
What? He's like, what, you think I know more than rabbis? You think I know more than the Gemara? You think I know more than that? He said, that's what the Gemara says. That's it.
Yeah. Back
Torah
off.
Chesed. You think I know any better? You think I know any better? I'm just flesh and blood. I don't know any better. I don't know any better, and that's the answer. That's what the Talmud says. That's what the answer is. I want a better answer. I want a deeper. We don't know. We have to admit we don't know. And we may never know. We may ever understand. These things are clouded and hiddenness within hiddenness. The end of days, all the contradictions of the prophecies, and all kinds of different things. But I want to know, who are you? Seriously, who are you to say that I want to know? I'm not saying it's not interesting, right? I'm not saying any of that. But there are contradictions all over the place. The Rambam says that's why you don't try and figure out when the Messiah is going to come, because you probably make a mistake. According to calculation, you make a mistake, then you say, oh, see, the Messiah didn't come. Must be it's not true. God forbid. Right? So what's the bottom line? Don't think you're holding on a level that you're not. And there are plenty of things out there we're never, ever going to understand. And if we're never going to understand, do not tell me. In any way, shape, or form, do not tell me or say anything like that, I want to be like Moshe Rabbeinu. I want to understand. You're not at that level. Nobody's at that level. Doesn't mean you don't go through tragedy. Doesn't mean it's not difficult. Doesn't mean that. Who are we in our puny brains? I'm going to leave on a pleasant note. Who are we in our puny brains to think I can understand the way God works? To me, I think probably to many other people, I think that's the ultimate in chutzpah. To try and understand that. Who are we? Read the end of the book of Job. Job gets hammered by God for the last 2 or 3 chapters. Gets hammered. I take this bird, the mother, father bird, want to kill it, want to eat it, and I save it. and I allow this bird to survive. Could you do that? No. Playing with a Leviathan, his breath would kill you, right? His fangs would kill you, and I play with him. Can you do that? No. Then what is God saying? He's saying, shut up. What does he say? Remember that song in the 70s? Shut up, your face. Just shut your mouth. You don't have room to talk, right? It sounds harsh. I understand it sounds harsh. But at the end of the day, who are we to question, right? So I'm going to leave you on that nice, friendly note.
Oh, Rabbi. Yeah. I almost feel like I need to go have another shower.
You might. You very well may. This stuff should make us sweat, right? It should make us feel like a piece of dirt in a certain way. It's good for me as well. Like I always say, if I listen to half the things I'd say, I would look different, right? But if we really think and analyze, of course, we are all heretics to a certain extent, right? One of the Mishnas in Pirkei Avos says, know how to answer the heretic. Doesn't mean I have to learn their stuff and answer them. It means I have to. One explanation is I have to answer the heretic in myself, and why we don't do things consistently and all that. It's a hard thing, it's a very hard thing. But if we're more or less happy the way God runs the world, there's so many things we're not going to understand, and it doesn't matter. And really, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to say, regardless of the difficulty we go through, regardless of the
trouble, there are bearings in life, like we see how a plant reaches for the sun. Okay, it's got a direction, it's moving and should be moving, and Torah is clear that we do have a degree or a direction we should be flowing or pointing towards. Correct?
No, 100%. We don't always reach it, but a person shouldn't think, well, this is such a tissue generation, a weak generation. God's going to cut me some slack. Why? Because it's such a weak generation. But if you have greater potential, so what would be permissible for somebody else would be, something so egregious because they understand better and they understand how it works. They understand how the world works and how we should look at it. Because in general, the reality is, again, let's make it clear. God is infinite. 100%, he's infinite. We're not infinite.
100%.
We're not privy to any of this information. None of it. We have to deal with whatever's thrown our way. Like my Rabbi always says, you're in God's army. Got a lot of sleep. You didn't get a lot of sleep. Shop and eat the matzah. Right? You got to go pray. These are the things you have to do. Whether it's hard, whether it's easy. We have to deal with things. I'm not saying not. I'm not saying there aren't plenty of things we have to deal with that are not so easy to go through. But it makes us who we are. It helps us grow. And it helps us develop.
Yeah,
we'd love things to be easy, but that's not the case. The question is, things should be smooth, but they're not always are. And if they're not smooth, we have to deal with it. We have to, somehow move on, and we have to try and reach our potential, and go through whatever trials we have in order to go through them, in order to reach our potential, and become the great people that we can become. But it's not easy. Everyone does not have it easy by any stretch. And if you have it easy, there's something else going on.
Wow. Well, I think you helped us to do away with whining. I think we've got no excuse.
I know. We're a whiny generation, but I understand why. I just think if people saw the bigger picture, I give one example. One example. Rav Coffman, of blessed memory, Torah Giants, the last generation. He saw some students, hanging outside while they should have been learning. So he went to see what's going on. He said, well, what are you guys doing? So we're just chilling a little bit. We're just, going through a difficult thing or whatever. We just want to chill a little bit. So Rav Coffman says, I saw my son killed in front of my eyes. I said, you guys going through something like that? And they just sort of like, no. They're like, go back inside and learn. I guarantee you what you're going through, I can help you go through it, whatever, but you're not going through that. If you're not going through something like that, go back and sit and learn. Again, everyone according to their level, and what they, how they're going to deal with it, whatever. We all deal with difficult things. There's no question, but, most of the time we're whining because, went to a gas station, didn't have gas. Mm-hmm. Walked into a store, they didn't have our special food. Or different things, or some little thing goes wrong, and we're sitting there fetching left and right because that's what we do.
We didn't.
But there's so many things to be thankful. We got to remember that.
Yeah. Rabbi, thank you so much. So tentatively, we didn't get to technically we didn't get to Mishnah 8 of chapter
Right.
2.
So
So are we?
next week, I mean, we should. I mean, I think I pretty much exhausted this. This topic would just be overkill. So yeah, pretty much. Mishnah 7 is kaput, is out to pasture, and I guess next week we'll hit Mishnah 8.
Excellent, excellent. So Hashem willing, we are tentatively on for next week, and you've still got Tanakh Talk tomorrow and your usual weekly broadcast. We just pray Hashem bless you and all your endeavors up north there. And people can always support you at orthodoxconversion.com, or they can catch you. Is your Facebook page down again, you were saying?
It seems like it is. And Michael Chaim Coffman's, I don't know. They thought I was spamming people again. We'll see if it comes back or not. There will be things up. I'll put on, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism. I'll put, there is a way I can still put stuff up there. So I'm going to try and do that unless I'm banned for 30 days. We'll see. But you can't keep someone down that long. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Well, just know you're in our prayers, Rabbi. We appreciate you sharing the light of Torah with us, and it's always a joy to learn of areas that we can refine or correct or adjust and put into practice. And I think you really hit a hard message home today that we shouldn't expect or even imagine that we deserve to understand it all that today for sure. So
no hoodsies. You don't get
no.
hoodsies. Come on.
Well, thank you. I've got to tune out because I've got part 34 of the 48 Ways of Wisdom coming up with Rabbi Aaron David Poston in about 23 minutes. So I got to sign off for now. So Hashem willing, we'll be back next week. We wish you all have a great, great, great day and great weekend. See you next week, folks.